First, I'm starting out with your typical sphere, and what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to increase our post subdivision so that we can have a little bit better resolution while we're editing this this piece. I'm going to use the move tool, and the purpose of the move tool is to try and squish this sphere down into a shape that looks like a dragon tear shape, like a dragon egg tear shape. What we're going for is a squished teardrop shape. So I want to, originally I didn't have symmetry turned on, but I ended up turning symmetry on just because it's going to make this process a lot easier. We're trying to make a dragon egg, but we need a dragon egg that looks dragony and looks like it has dragon scales. So what I've done is I've turned on local symmetry along the x-axis, and from the right side camera view, I'm using that move tool to push and stretch this sphere into kind of like a fingernail kind of shape. And we're going to use that shape around the dragon egg to make something that looks, dragon eggy. So here I'm just going in and I'm using a combination of that move tool, and then I'm also using the small dots on the gizmo tool to squish and squish it down and make it thinner into the shape that we want. I think that looks pretty good, so I go ahead and add in the radial array tool now. And with that radial array in place, I'm going to end up not manipulating the array itself. As you see, it turns everything when I manipulate the radial itself with the gizmo tool. We want to actually manipulate just the sphere shape within that radial. And I'm just picking an axis to rotate that with. I ended up deciding that I wanted to do maybe 12 of these, and you'll see in a minute that I'm going to switch to instead of having just 4 of these in the radial. Usually 10 to 12 is pretty good when we're doing the dragon egg. We're going to make that teardrop shape a bit smaller right now using that gizmo tool. We'll switch to the radial. We're going to increase that radial to 12. The trick here to make this look right is we're going to take 360 and divide it by 12, which ends up being 30. And we're going to use that number 30 and then divide it by another 2. We're going to use that in order to determine our snap positioning. That's going to play a role as we're duplicating all of these. And so we're going to go ahead and duplicate that radial. We're going to move it outwards. And then we're going to turn on snapping for the radial array itself instead of the object within the radial, instead of the sphere. And we're going to set that snapping to 15 degrees, which is half of 30. And then we're going to rotate every time we duplicate the spheres, the radial spheres. Every time we duplicate it, we're going to offset it by 15 degrees. And that's going to create that repeating, alternating pattern as we're moving and creating the egg shape. I'm going to go through and I'm going to shrink down the sphere. I'm going to rotate it by roughly 15 degrees upwards at first along that green axis, or the red axis, I believe is what I ended up rotating. And then I'm just going to keep repeating this process. I'm going to clone. And then I'm going to grab the sphere. I'm going to move it about halfway up the previous sphere location. Then I'm going to switch back to the radial. I'm going to rotate it on that snap by 15 degrees, which is going to perfectly offset it. And then I'm going to just double check my angles. Usually I'll switch back to the sphere. I'm going to grab my rotation, and sometimes I'll rotate it by 15 degrees, at least at first. That's fine. And then I'm going to carefully manipulate it so that the sphere falls behind the other spheres to start forming the bottom of that eggshell for the dragon egg. And then, rinse and repeat. I'm going to make a copy, click on the sphere, move the sphere outwards about halfway up the previous one, grab the radial. I'm going to make sure my snapping is on that green axis. I also end up increasing the size a bit as we move up the egg. And when I'm increasing the size, all I'm really trying to focus on is making sure that the edges of those eggs touch. I tried increasing the radius on the radial itself, and it turned out that the distance between each sphere stayed the same. So that's not an approach that's going to work. You need each of those egg drop, those teardrop shapes of the spheres. You need them to touch side by side so that they form a solid wall. And so what I'm doing is just making sure that as I increase the sphere size, I just make sure that those edges touch as I'm moving upwards and outwards along the radius. And then going back into the sphere, and I'm just using that blue gizmo arrow to move it kind of slow, a little bit more into position. And then using that rotation angle. Sometimes, again, I'm using the snapping tool to kind of snap it at 15 degrees angle to tilt it inwards as I'm moving up. Sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't matter to keep it at that 15 degrees. Sometimes 15 degrees is too much to be trying to change the angle. And let's see here, I make another copy, move it about halfway up the other one, grab the radial, snap it to 15 degrees, rotate it, and switch back to the sphere to kind of get it into position. I'll end up squeezing it back in. I'll either change the size, I end up changing the size to make sure that the edges are touching each other. And then rinse and repeat each one. And at this point, I had decided that it'd be a good idea to add a little bit more character to the dragon egg shape. So I switched to the Crease tool and turn on my local symmetry, and then switch to one of the spheres. I invert the crease so that the crease creases outwards instead of inwards. And then I just grabbed a crease and pulled it down the teardrop, the outside edge of the teardrop. And I went for something that I thought would look pretty reasonable. But I had to fix all the old ones. So turn on local symmetry, switch to it, grab the crease tool, crease downwards. And I just had to fix the few rows that I had previously. Again, making sure that I switch to local symmetry each time. And then tap on a new one. Make sure local symmetry is turned on. And then pull the crease tool down. And yeah, not too much to it. I just thought it would look a little bit more interesting if we added a crease to the teardrop shape to make it look more like a dragon scale kind of look. or a more unique dragon scale look. It's up to you how you want to approach this part. You can add in as much detail to each scale as you want for the dragon shell. And really it's your choice. It's your design. And you have a lot of freedom here. So just do whatever feels right for you. I think at this point, I realized that maybe 15-degree snapping wasn't always the best. I think I started needing to turn off the snapping tool because I didn't want it curving in too much. It's either at this point or soon afterwards that I decide that, the snapping tool isn't the best for changing the angle as we're working up the side of the egg. Yeah, sometimes it's fine, sometimes it isn't. Doesn't really matter. But yeah, just rinse and repeat the process from what we were doing before. Always just slightly changing the size. I think I start reducing the total size of the object at some point. I decided that maybe, the shells need to be smaller as we're moving up the side of the egg instead of being larger. If you keep rotating at 10 degrees or 15 degrees every time you go up, eventually it's going to collapse on itself faster than what an egg shape looks like. So, you kind of stop doing that at some point. And I'm just making sure that as I'm building the egg shape upwards, that I'm keeping the eggshell edge behind the previous eggshell. But, that's pretty straightforward. And then here you can see that I'm just shrinking down the size as I'm moving up the side of the egg. I think I went back and kind of corrected it a little bit because I felt like the other shells were a little too large. Reposition them a little bit just for aesthetics. And this process is fairly simple. You don't have to put too much thought into, making everything perfect the first time. So going in and readjusting at any point is fine. The earlier you can do those adjustments, the better, just because, if you decide to do a design change, add more creases or more elements to the edge of the egg as you're moving up it can cause you to have to go back and redo a lot of work later. So naturally you'll want to kind of just make those design choices early on. You'll want to kind of decide what you want to do before you move too far up the egg. But yeah, just same rinse, repeat, adjust. As I get to the very top of the egg, right now I'm at about the 16.5-minute mark. I'm kind of being careful not to make the shell sphere size too small, the teardrop size too small. Because as you shrink the diameter, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you end up having to add 20, 30 layers in there just to get to the top edge of the egg. And so you end up sacrificing and not worrying so much about shrinking the size a lot as you're getting towards the top of the egg, and you go for more overlap is more acceptable as you're hitting the top, so that you don't kind of have this infinite regress of like turtles all the way down kind of thing, because eventually those eggshells will get smaller and smaller and smaller as you're trying to move up to the top of the egg, and then it becomes a little bit ridiculous trying to add layer after layer after layer. You end up just kind of accepting more and more overlap right at the top edge of the egg and just collapse it in on itself. And once you get to a point where you feel like, it looks pretty good, you just close off or cap off the top of the egg. Not too complicated. And just leave it like that. And then make sure you go in, save it, do any finishing touches for aesthetics. Here at the very end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually trim off the bottom edge, and I'm just going to use, there's a couple ways to do this. You can add a rectangle or a cube into your scene and then squish it down, and then use your eyeball tool to make it disappear. Here I'm just, when I first added it, it was inside an array, so it ended up in an awkward position. I would just remove it out of that radial array, move it out to where it is by itself, reset its position, moved it to the bottom of the dragon egg. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to, I had to do a couple tricks just to make sure that everything gets removed and cut correctly. So I end up validating the bottom couple layers of egg spheres, and then I just do a join children on the validation. And what it does is it just makes them into a single radial piece. By making them a single piece, I can make a single cut out of those pieces using the Boolean tool, and we'll show the Boolean tool and how to use that in just a second. But yeah, once I've got that in the right place and I've got those validated, I'm going to turn the eyeball off on the cube that I added, select the 2 rows, and then I'm going to do a Boolean, and that's going to make a nice solid flat surface for the bottom of the egg. And I'm doing that for the 3D printing purpose, okay? When you're making an egg like this, you kind of want to cut it at the bottom so that you have you'll start out at a 45-degree angle as you're moving up. That's the best. That'll keep you from having to add a lot of plastic support to the egg, and it gives you some freedom in the design of making sure that it sticks to the plate, making sure that when it prints, you don't have to do a lot of extra clipping and cutting away. And then yeah, to finish up, all I did was add a bit of I ended up going with a transparency effect or a glass effect just for fun, just to make it look nice at the end, and did some lighting effects and stuff like that. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. This is kind of a voiceover overview style. It's not the same as what I've done in the past. And if you liked it, go ahead and hit like. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, and you'll get notified when we have new videos coming up on the channel. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you in the next one.